Night folds the coastlines of the Aegean into one long shadow, and the old smoke of Troy is only a taste on the wind. The storm is over, the aftermath is not. Ships that once raced side by side for glory now wander alone, each with a different silence on deck. Names have been turned into rumours. A king in Argos who did not fear the gods and paid for it on a banquet floor. A captain blown backwards so many times that even his enemies began to miss him. Far off, on an island that looks like a sigh held too long, a hall of cedar and polished stone breathes perfume into the sea. A song moves through it without words. Waves answer with their own repeating chorus. Someone is kept there, neither prisoner nor guest. The distinction salted away each morning and repainted each night. Above all this, dawn, like a pale coin in a god's hand, lifts a first light over Olympus. There is old business to settle. Zeus speaks first with that weary clarity that comes when justice has been done late but clean. Mortals blame us for what they choose. He recalls a man who took another's wife and kingdom and was warned and did it anyway, and found a blade waiting at the supper. The point is not cruelty, it is instruction. Athena listens and leans forward into the sentence that matters. The one I love for craft and patience, she says, sits on a shore not his, salted by someone else's kindness until it stings. The king's name enters the room like the memory of a promise. Odysseus. Hermes is sent down the bright air to a cove called Ogygia, where time is a smooth stone. Athena takes a different road, the one that ends in a courtyard unguarded by anything except arrogance. Ithaca wakes with the smell of spilled wine and meat grease gone sweet in summer. The great hall built for feasts and verdicts is a market for appetites now. Cloaks flung over carved chairs, dogs pushed away from scraps, the loud certainty of men who have outstayed the first welcome and forgot there ever was a limit. It is not a party, it is a siege disguised as hospitality. They drink the king's red, cut the king's oxen, and plan, with bright lazy confidence, how best to turn a household into an inheritance. Two voices lead and poison, Antinous with his mouth full of honey and knives, Eurymachus with his eyes always calculating who will laugh and who will not. At the far edge of the room a singer is made to work. The lyre speaks into the racket, tales of hard seas, planks breaking, prayers said into wind. That kind of song does not pair well with meat, and someone lifts a brow to hush it. Sorrow is vulgar in front of men who have decided to forget. From the high stair a figure steps down with authority wrapped close. Penelope, discipline in human form. She asks for a different song, not to forbid grief, but to choose something that doesn't tear the sky she is holding together with both hands. The suitors call it weakness. One voice, newly steady, contradicts them. The bard sings what his mind is moved to sing, says the air of the house, and the hall redistributes its silence around the sentence. The mother vanishes down the hall she has been walking for years, one way by day, another at night, her loom a patient accomplice. A shroud grows for an old father not yet claimed by earth. By lamplight the cloth unweaves and a morning finds the work inexplicably still unready. Trickery as virtue, delay as a kind of faith. Outside, under the portico where columns cool the air, a stranger stands with a traveller's staff and a friend's eyes. He gives a name that smells of distant decks, Mentes, captain of Taphian oars, but the voice behind it belongs to clear counsel. Athena reads the hall and the horizon in one look and speaks to the air apart from the noise. Call them to a hearing, she says. Name what is happening with daylight on it. Then go ask the world what it knows. Sail to Pylos. Listen to the old horseman who remembers everything. Cross to Sparta. Hear from the king who has counted his own years at sea. If there is news, bring it home. If there is not, mark the loss. Spend what must be spent of sorrow, and set the house in order. The advice is not simple, but it is clean. She touches courage into the younger voice the way one might prime a flame with a careful breath. Then she is gone, leaving a staff leaning where a guest would leave it, and resolve like a weight in the chest. Night stops pretending it is eternal. The island turns face toward the sun and finds a shore crowded with men who have not seen a council since it cost them something. They drag benches out, complain about the hour, joke, yawn, and feel the novelty of being asked to listen. The eldest of them, bones like the old trees uphill, voice like gravel shaken in a pouch, blesses the moment because he remembers the last time a king stood where the boy stands. Telemachus does not ask. He declares, "This is theft with napkins," he says in words more measured than the fire behind them. "You eat what is not yours. You talk about the future I am supposed to hold and chew it while you talk." He asks for ships, not permission. Antinous rises in outrage and sweetness. He blames Penelope because powerful men like to target someone who does quiet work well. He explains the loom trick with a smile as if telling a story on a relative who is clever, but in the end harmless. Weave by day, unweave by night. Keep everyone waiting and call it loyalty. He suggests solutions that taste like poison hidden in honey. Eurymachus follows, gentle as a wolf alone in a sheepfold. He assures the assembly that he respects everything, this island, this family, this order, and then folds the respect into a warning about authority and who really keeps peace on this rock. It is the kind of speech that persuades people who want to be tired. The air answers. The assembly adjourns itself rather than decide. Noon sharpens the island's edges. In the harbour, fishermen stitch nets and don't talk. On the inland slopes, olive groves remember better politics. In the hall, shadows lengthen, while drinking continues. A prophet with salt in his beard and patience in tatters sees two eagles tear the air over the city and says aloud what omens always mean. Force is not the only language. He names the birds, the house, the death, waiting for arrogance, as faithful as a hound. The suitors laugh, because it is cheaper than hindsight. Plans form quietly. The house's old keeper, Eurycleia, who has known generations of names and measured their tempers the way other women measure grain, hears the request for a ship and a crew, and put her hand over her mouth to keep from mourning out loud. She swears by everything that has ever kept a hearth hot to keep the errand close between them. Athena, wearing yet another face, moves through the island like a rumour with hands. A sailor agrees to an evening departure and doesn't remember the moment he decided. Oars lay themselves where they will be needed. Wine and barley and clean water appear on the docks without inventory. At the same time, far beyond any sail, Hermes rides air so thin the birds look like thoughts. He finds Oyssia dressed in the sort of time usually only winter achieves, repetitive, flawless, and exhausting. Calypso meets him with courtesy that does not hide anything. She points out delicately that power looks different from different shores. Gods order what gods themselves would never bear. She has warmed a man who washed up like driftwood and made him shine again. She has offered the one bribe mortals don't know how to refuse, safety with no ending, and he has paced the beach anyway, looking at an invisible line in the west where Ithaca lies. Hermes does not argue. He delivers. Cut cedar. Make all tools. Make the leaving possible. The goddess answers first with grief, then with obedience, which is its own kind of grief. She tells her guest the truth and offers food he cannot taste. Later, as sun breaks itself on a black horizon, the sound of axes wraps the trees in a new shape. Keels in their first draft. In Ithaca, the shadows of men who did not dream straight fall long and crooked across the courtyard. Antinous and a handful of those who enjoy the feeling of secrecy plan to spill blood before it gathers itself into leadership. An ambush is agreed upon with the disinterest of men making a dinner reservation. There will be a narrow strait, a curve in the coast, a sudden crowding of boats, and a sentence cut short. They pace the high walk with their plans and do not look down, because they do not believe anything could be under their feet except floor. Evening becomes the ally of the few. Athena pours darker wine into the sky, then pulls it back enough to reveal a path. The air walks to the water with a stride borrowed from someone he almost remembers. The ship's ribs take him in, rope sings. Oars set a pilgrimage in motion. No herald cries it, no crowd watches. The departure is a secret between sea and stars. A wind, not too much, not too little, leans into the sail as a guest, not a thief. What is left behind is more than it looks like. A loom that will be asked again to defeat time. A mother who believes 10 things at once and keeps her spine straight under all of them. A hall that has learned how to be ugly under candlelight. A pair of men counting knives. A city that will blame weather for what character started. What moves ahead is not just a search for news, it is the first answer to the haunting in the opening lines. Tell me of the man, because knowledge is how a name stays alive. Pylos waits with smoke on its beach and old men telling the same story differently every year, because that's the job of those who come back. Sparta waits with floors so polished the sky repeats itself indoors. And a host who has earned a long memory the hard way. In between is a sea that doesn't care in the way that heals pride and teaches prayer. Back on Ogygia, cedar becomes shapes that remember water. A mast grows where a tree once stood, a sail waits like a lung. Calypso speaks last kindness, and one last attempt at persuasion that doesn't land because some desires are older than immortality. Odysseus counts holes, knots lines, smells the fibres because that is how you trust a thing. He's the sort of man who knows what every plank owes every other plank and holds them to it. When the tide chooses, he will push off by muscle memory born on other beaches and talk to the sea with his hands. In Ithaca, the dining lasts too late. Words slur, laughter loses its aim, a cup strikes stone and rings longer than it should. Upstairs, the loom waits for the turn of the lock in the door. Outside, the sky argues with itself about stars and clouds and fails, on purpose to finish the quarrel. On the road to the port, a figure moves quickly without looking like haste. On the rocky cape with the good ambush, men practice smiles and rehearse indifference. Above all of it, the gods do not sleep, they measure. Zeus looks at a balance scale and drops into one pan a sliver of cedar sap, into the other a braid of grey hair saved from a comb. The arms find level as if relieved. Athena rests her hand on the back of the night and urges it along. Hermes, job done, watches the horizon for a sail that has not yet swung up and smiles, having seen this kind of stubbornness before in mortals, and knowing it usually pays out, late but fair. If you listen inside the quiet, you can hear the theme already. Home is a place and a promise and a practice. It is also a test. Will you keep shape under tempting kindness, under organised insult, under a sky that teaches patience by giving you none? The first answer has already been given, not by the man whose name soaks the poem, but by those holding the edges until he can take the centre again. A ship moves. A hall waits. The sea pulls breath into its chest and gets ready to speak. Dawn rubs its eyes over the long beach at Pylos and finds the shore bright with sacrifice. Black bulls garlanded with leaves, spits turning, smoke carrying salt and fat into the sky like a letter. The people are praying to the Earthshaker because anyone who lives by the sea knows which name to say out loud. Oars hiss into sand. A lean ship noses up through foam. Strangers step down into the ceremony as if they've been expected since before the animals were led from the pens. The elder who hosts the rite turns with a face that looks carved by wind and kindness. Nestor, who has seen kings lift banners and set them down in shame, who has counted more dawns than most men get, walks forward with hands open. He does not ask first, he feeds first. Meats are cut clean, bread is passed, wine sunned to warm, water poured over fingers. Only then does he ask names, and the youth with the grave eyes lifts his voice and tells the truth. He has memorized all his life. I am the son of Odysseus, out to ask the world if it has seen him. The old horseman breathes in memory and lets it settle. He tells what he knows, how the fleet split after Troy, how one shore welcomed, another betrayed, how a certain captain loved by Athena angered Poseidon with too much tongue and too little gratitude, how the best of them were not the luckiest. He names the ones who reached home and wished they had not. He names the ones who met soft beds and hard knives. Of Odysseus he has no sight, only a certainty that if he breathes, he is still bending fate to his will. Advice comes wrapped in bread. Sail farther, find the red-haired king whose house still smells of sea salt and cedar, Menelaus, who took too long getting home and learned truths nobody else has. Night folds itself over the feasting. Athena, wearing the face of Mentor, shares a bench and speaks low, teaching courage as if it were a craft. Tell your name when it helps, hide it when it saves, keep your course even when others talk loud. At dawn, Nestor gifts horses and a chariot, but the goddess says no to wheels. Oars will be faster than wheels over mountain roads, with ambush mines hiding behind every olive tree. He sends a son to guide the guest instead. Pisistratus, soft-spoken, stendardi, the kind of companion who makes a journey shorter by saying exactly enough at the right time. The road south runs along the spine of the land between hills that smell of resin and thyme. Two travellers talk the way men talk who have work and no need to prove they're working. Short lines, long silences, questions folded into weather. By the time they see Sparta, noon has polished the world to a hard shine, and the palace under its mountain glitters like a fresh oath. Inside the carved doors is a different kind of wake. Menelaus's halls hold the sun in their floors and send it back to the ceiling. Bronze gleams, lions look on from hammered shields, and everything is heavy with trophies turned into furniture. The host is still more sailor than king, scar-limbed, courteous, an air of someone who learned gratitude from loss. He greets the travellers like brothers he has not met yet, and feeds them before he braids questions into hospitality. The queen moves through the room with a composure that makes time hesitate. Her face is famous enough to steal a war's breath, and yet the thing that stays with you is the way she listens. Helen remembers voices and costumes, the sound timbers make when soldiers hide inside them, and a woman tests a ruse with another ruse. She could tell 100 versions and chooses the few that teach something. That night, resting on couches under light that behaves itself, grief starts to curdle the wine. The red-haired king tells a story of storms that bent ships like reeds, and a continent that felt endless. Helen lifts a small vial from a chest carved with lotus and river beasts, and lets a few drops slide into the mix. The cup goes round again. The woolly weight on tongues lifts. The tear that was coming learns to wait for a more useful hour. Egypt, the queen says when someone asks about the vial. There are gentler arts than war. The talk turns to a certain island where the wind dies and the shore refuses footprints. Menelaus says the name of the sea's old keeper as if he has earned the right. Proteus, who knows where everything is and refuses to say unless you can hold him through his changes. A daughter of that island had mercy. She taught a trick. Lie among seals, wear their skins, breathe through stench, love the plan more than you hate the disguise. When the old one rose from water to count his herd and lay in the sun, they caught him. He turned into a lion, into a snake, into a river itself. They held on until he turned into a truth-teller. Then the stories poured out, of friends drowned for bragging, of islands haunted by soft-voiced queens, of a man not dead but kept, on a green lip of land ringed by a wrinkle in the world's fabric. Odysseus, Proteus said, and Menelaus repeats the word with the odd smile of a man remembering a map he's not allowed to sail again. Alive, detained by a nymph whose kindness hurts. The air sits very straight because there are ways to fall apart and learn nothing from it. He asks for specifics, he receives them. The king gives gifts because that is how the world works when it is being itself. A bowl that can make wine taste like dusk, fine robes, a pair of mules to carry weight for those without lords to do it. He adds counsel that costs nothing and feels like building. Go home now, trouble believes in practice. While you were coming here, men were rehearsing a sentence about you with knives in their mouths. Meanwhile, far from polished floors, a cove that smells of cedar shavings and clean rope is losing its favourite guest. The nymph has set the last peg and smoothed the last spar with a hand that knows how to make permanence. She brings a cloth and a belt, food packed like summer in baskets, and a wind bottled in advice. She tells him the safe stars, the bear who never drinks the sea, the Pleiades shivering like a small thought, the arc of Orion you do not follow. She says more than must be said because leaving someone well sometimes means overloading them with care. He listens, thanks, promises nothing, because there is only one promise he can keep and it has a longitude. He pushes off. The raft flexes and holds. The sea accepts a new thing on its back without commentary. For 17 days the line between sky and water holds steady, and the man at the long pole keeps the bear over his left shoulder, as if it were a companion. He sleeps in nets of moments. He eats the way people eat when the horizon is enough. His mind does what endurance minds do. It sorts, it stitches, it stores, it watches weather like a gambler watching a dealer's hands. Back in Ithaca, the hall is too loud to think. Someone has told someone who was supposed to keep a secret, and rumour arrives wrapped in concern. The air has gone in a black ship, and men with good sandals and bad hearts have planned to intercept him at a narrow place in the water called Asteris. A herald loyal to the house, Medon, brings the news, because truth belongs to the people who will use it well. Penelope hears and turns white, then steadies into action as if the floor under her feet were another loom. She speaks to the chorus of women who keep the house breathing. She speaks to the old woman who has known her since the day she came through these doors. She speaks to the gods with the strictness of someone who has earned the right to be direct. Athena hears grief like a harp string plucked hard and answers in the shape of a comfort that looks like a sister. In the half-light before sleep is committed to being sleep, a figure enters that room where Penelope breathes without showing it. The face belongs to Iphtime, who knows how to make morning bearable. Words like rain in summer. Your son is attended. The goddess is a shadow at his shoulder. Sleep. Not because sleep will solve things, but because strength requires it. Penelope argues the way an honest mind argues with visions, the comfort holds. She closes her eyes because choosing to live is the only way to learn what happens next. At sea near Ithaca, the ambushers practice nonchalance. They are the kind of men who wear quiet like a costume and take it off when they are alone together. Oars are muffled. Eyes narrow where the channel angles. They plan to let the curve of the headland pull the ship toward them like a fish to a hook. They laugh softly at lines from a speech they intend to deliver to explain the accident after the fact. They have not asked the water for permission to lie on it. On Ogygia's empty horizon a fan of gulls tilts, then steadies. Far to the south a line of dancers moves along a shore with a drum born too small to carry the dream properly. To the north a whale turns and lifts one eye above the surface to watch a creature made of trees and cords. Up above it all a god who has been feasted on black bulls by a far river turns from those bright fires and remembers he has business nearer home. Poseidon's hand on the sea is not always catastrophe. Sometimes it is simply weather, put back into its role as ruler. This time he chooses fury for a tutor. Clouds pile like armies. Wind runs down the rope like a threat. The sea stands up with long teeth gleaming. The raft creaks. A man whose life is a braid of attention and persistence does what good sailors do. He makes himself heavy where it matters, light where it doesn't, ties himself to life without turning it into prison. A white shape breaks the wave, no bird, no foam. Leucothea, born of water and renamed by it, rises with hair like rope in a tide and offers a band that has saved others, a modest god's kindness, small and relentless. Let the raft go, she says with the gentleness of someone who knows the cost of obedience. Trust the strip of woven hope. Swim with your face to wind when wind is your enemy. Roll with it when it pretends to be your friend. He listens because survival has untrained him from pride. The band goes on, the raft goes away to be eaten by distance. The man goes under and up, counting breaths like coins. Elsewhere the arrow of the heir's errand hums. Menelaus sends him off with more than gifts, with warnings and the odd blessing only those who have met gods can give. Pisistratus steers the road home. He knows where to water the horses and where not to stop. In Ithaca, Eurycleia keeps small routines regular with the discipline of a priest. Sleep where you would sleep if everything were normal. Eat what you would eat if fear were lazy. Sweep the same corners because dust thrives on panic. Penelope lights lamps one by one and moves through rooms like a sentence that has not decided yet whether it ends in a period or an oath. At the headland where rock and current conspire, men rehearse the ambush again. Mouths move with lines they plan to say if the ship surprises them, if someone sees, if the gods get interested. They have forgotten that the gods are already interested. In the sky, Athena's attention tilts and shadows lengthen where they should. The path home adjusts itself at the last moment for the boy at the helm. Sometimes divine intervention is simply a wind that refuses to be lazy. On the open sea, pain becomes program. A swimmer times breathes to waves and lets the band keep him from the kind of fear that stiffens. The goddess who offered it becomes gull again and leaves because miracles are most useful when they are brief. For 2 days of violence and 2 nights of counting the darkness between stars, a man aims at a rumour of coastline he cannot yet see. Then at dawn, cliff and tree and a long curve of beach, Syria, show themselves like a sentence found at the bottom of a page. The sea does not hand out mercy without proofs. One last breaker tries to take him into rock. One last wish to sleep tries to whisper, now. He swims along the rip until an eddy gives him a hand. He finds a river mouth, and the river has different manners than the sea. Gentle banks, reeds that speak in small voices, a current that believes in ferrying. He crawls onto mud, returns the band to its owner as instructed because gratitude is a kind of navigation, drags boughs over himself for a roof, and sleeps under leaves that smell like rain and sap and the smallest possible version of home. Back in Sparta, a king and queen wake to the sound of their own house being the right kind of busy. Looms, kitchens, the low talk of men who will saddle horses and mean it when so they promise to look after guests in absentia. In Pylos, an old man blesses the road ahead and tells his son he has learned the useful art of returning someone safely. On Ithaca, Penelope's lamp burns down to a bead and does not quite go out. In the narrow channel where a murder was supposed to be easy, mist drifts without schedule and tests men who are not used to being tested unless they requested it. Over all of it, the gods continue their quiet bureaucracy. Hermes has already turned his face back toward distances that need messages. Athena is counting heartbeats and placing them exactly where they'll carry most. Poseidon, having spent his argument, lets the sea remember how to be a highway again. And Zeus, who lifted the question at dawn not for gossip but for order, smiles without light because a promise is in the process of keeping itself, one breath and one oar stroke at a time. If you listen into the hush after a storm has told its whole story, you can hear the 3 lines this chapter wrote in water and air. Seek what must be sought even when answers arrive slowly and cost sleep. Hold your shape under kindness that would keep you by making you smaller. Move toward shore with whatever a god puts in your hand. Oar, band, courage, plan, and trust that those who love you are holding the edges steady until you step back through the door that is yours. Morning unfolds over Sheria like silk shaken out over a bright table. In the night a man slept under dripping leaves with a river, talking softly beside him. Now a different current begins upstream, in a dream sent on purpose. A presence steps into a royal chamber with the face and voice of a trusted companion and arranges the day as if laying out linen. Your household stores are full of garments that want washing, the dream says, and it names mules, car baskets, and the place where the river runs shallow over smooth stones. It says nothing about fate, it says everything about timing. The sleeper wakes with a purpose that feels like her own idea. Carts creak in the courtyard. A pair of animals switch their tails against flies while attendants heap the bed with folded fabric. Tunics, mantles, veils, belts that hold a waist just so. The royal father, mild, prudent, hears the request and nods, sending not an escort of spears but of helpful hands. They drive through orchards that never tire of bearing, apples whose skins shine like fresh oaths, figs drooping with sugar, vines trained as carefully as laws, and turn down to the washing place where a pool eddies before meeting the river's swift course. Work begins with laughter. The baskets tip, clothes thump into water, feet and cloth stamp together in a rhythm that could be a festival if it weren't a chore. When the foam runs clear, they spread bright wet over sun-warmed rock, then bathe, oil their skin from slim-necked flasks, and eat bread sweetened with wind. A ball appears, the play becomes louder, a perfect throw goes high and the ball splashes and does not come back. The shout that follows lifts birds from reeds and pulls a sleeping man up through leaves and mud. He rises as far as decency allows, breaks off a bough of olive to make privacy, and speaks across the distance with a care he learned under harder skies. The choice matters. Rush in and be driven off by fear, or measure words and be met. He measures. I beg you by the God who hears strangers, he says, voice made of salt and gratitude. Are you mortal, or more than mortal? If mortal, then happiness lives where you walk. If more, then you must be Artemis's kin in carriage and courage. He asks for cloth and for a line of instruction, nothing more. The water glitters around his knees. The shore holds its breath. The royal maid, beauty without weakness, is not afraid. She is skilled at reading emergencies. She weighs his nakedness against his civility and finds the balance safe. Her attendants step back with a naturalness that looks like leaves stirring. She speaks plainly, the way true kindness does. From my father's hand come house and city, she says, but from our queen's comes consent. Our people have a particular way with strangers. We honour them and we scrutinise them. Wash, anoint yourself, put on these garments we brought for work. When you walk into town, do not walk with me. A crowd's tongue is quick, reputations are thin shell. Wait in the sacred grove outside the gates until twilight, then follow my directions to the palace and clasp my mother's knees. If she accepts, the rest will follow. She offers a jar of oil, a packet of bread and wine, and the kind of glance that is permission without promise. He goes to the river, kneels and lets the cold work. Mud sluices away, brine uncurls. He breaks the tangles from his hair. Olive shines on skin. When he pulls on fine woven cloth, he ceases to look like a man rescued, and looks like himself again, a figure whose competence reads in his hands before it reads in his face. The attendants return closer now, because his bearing is its own argument. The cart turns toward the city. He takes the path along the reeds, as advised, and stops under a small stand of trees where smoke from household kitchens drifts out toward the fields like a spell against solitude. Athena has been ahead of him on the road, walking in the shape of a water carrier. At the gate she meets him with the calculated innocence that only complete control of a situation can afford. "Traveller," she says, pointing, "there is a palace where bronze shines like afternoon, and dogs of gold watch a door. Do not be deceived by craft. This house's splendour is a skin over something honest." The queen's name is Arete. She speaks, and even the king revises his thought. Kneel to her first, not from flattery but from understanding. If favour lives anywhere in this city, it lives in her keeping. She breathes a mist around him so that stepping into the streets is stepping into a privacy not even crowds can break. Doors open, market voices blur. A child runs across his path and does not see him. No, let's not name that word. A vendor lifts a fish and haggles with nobody. This is what protection looks like when gods do it properly. The palace is everything reports have said and more. Doors hang on posts with fittings fine enough to tire a jeweller's eye. The hall's pillars throw their own light back at the sun. The floor holds a brightness as steady as a pool in windless weather. Along the entrance stand two shapes of hound, metal stiffened into attention, mouths closed on an eternal growl, their menace and solace the work of a smith who knew how to put heart into ore. Servants move like parts of a machine that runs on courtesy. Within earshot, the queen's women ply their craft at a loom that has learned from goddesses. Cloth moving with its own mind, patterns walking out to meet the weaver's hands. He goes straight in and chooses the only correct act for this room. He passes the king as if time were deciding whether to recognise him, and drops to the queen, arms out around her knees as though they belong to a shrine. "Mercy," he says, no flourish, and a passage home. Then he sits down in the ashes of the hearth, not as dramatics but as technique. Fire is witness, humility makes arguments land. Silence works for a heartbeat. An elder with confidence made gentle by age, Echenius, asks why a suppliant sits on cinders in a room full of upholstered seats. The king wakes to himself at once. The stranger is lifted, set on a chair with carvings of vines that have seen centuries, and a silver cup finds his hand, bread arrives, meat follows, bathwater comes in a polished vessel, oil gleams in a shallow bowl. Dignity is returned in practical steps. Hunger first, then questions. Only when the hunger loosens its grip does conversation begin. The king asks whence and how. The guest answers with an economy that shows habit. "I am a man who has known better weather. Calypso kept me. She loved without asking consent. She offered me youth's counterfeit. I thanked and refused because love that deletes your name is a polite disaster." He says nothing yet about Troy, about caves that echoed with the words nobody, about islands where people were furniture. There will be time for all of it if this house is the house it looks like. Arete's gaze is a tool finer than any brooch pin. She sees the garments, the weave is hers, the dye her people's. A clever mind does not miss what her hands have made. "This robe," she says, not accusing, not soft, "came from my loom." Tell me by what path? The answer is frank and formatted to spare reputations. He praises the royal maid who gave instructions. He repeats her warning about walking together within the walls. He makes no boast of beauty or the susceptibility of the young. He takes responsibility for the discretion that added a layer of distance to that kindness. The honesty is a good gambit. Arete's expression shifts by increments you would need a sculptor's eye to detect. Alcinous, king, navigator, keeper of this city's exceptional seamanship, speaks in the generous tradition of men who know exactly how good their oarsmen are. "Remain," he says, Tomorrow we will convene our assembly, make gifts, choose a crew of the best, and set you down where you say the word home." He adds, half to himself, a wish that such a man had washed ashore a suitor rather than a suppliant. Fate does not honour footnotes. The thought passes like a fish shadow under a boat. A bed is made in the portico on smooth stones with purple covers, rug and cloak, and sleep comes down on the guest like a second garment, hard-earned, without dreams. Morning is all bronze and sunlight again. Alcinous' heralds walk the streets with words that have weight. Benches are pulled into rank near the harbour, where ships look like beasts crouched for coiled leaps. The king speaks with the confidence of a people who trust their hands. We do not keep strangers bottled up for display. We feed, we test, we send. A seat is placed for the guest. Demodocus, the singer, crown of laurel above a face turned inward toward the well where songs are pulled, takes the lyre that is always waiting for him. The room straightens into attention. He sings the first piece with no need of names from audience or host. A quarrel beneath Troy's towers, two minds in a single cause, one edged like a spear, the other bent like a bow, speaking truth so loudly that captains blushed and gripped spear shafts to keep from choosing sides. He sings the way an argument becomes a tactic when shared enemies are listening. He sings how pride can break like a wave that sundered the night. The guest listening wraps his face in his cloak and practices the art of silent grief. The king notices generosity is also discretion. He nods at the singer and changes the music. Out they go to the ground where sand takes prints and men turn pastime into proof. Runners go light and swift, wrestlers lock and slither. Boxers test the brag in each other's chins. A long jumper flies further by rhythm than by thigh. A discus is polished wade. The guest sits modest and declines to boast. One voice, a beautiful mouth with a thin mind behind it, jeers that perhaps this one is more a merchant than a man who has felt iron on his forearm. The insult lands with the soft sound a bad knife makes in fruit. The stranger's stomach tightens. Long practice at war with his own temper wins the first beat. Then the right anger stands up and asks for the disc. He turns it in his palm to feel the balance as if it were an argument, not a stone. He throws not with rage, but with remembering, of fields under Ilion where weights had other names, and the bronze sings across the sky and bits the earth far beyond the rest. He says nothing at first, because the sound itself is speech. Then he says what is necessary and not one syllable more. I am not the strongest in all things, but in many I am sufficient. If you want contests beyond these, bow spear into a moving target. You will find my name keeps you company. Alcinous smiles the way a captain smiles when a wind he ordered last night arrives at noon. He calls off the potential for escalation with a flourish of culture instead of combat. The dancers come in. Two men step forward who make the crowd forget gravity is a law. They take a purple ball, toss and catch it in arcs so clean the mind hears lines as well as sees them. They flip and travel underneath its path. They trade places in a geometry that flatters a god of harmony. The singer strikes up a different tune, not of war or work, but of secret rooms. Ares and Aphrodite found out by a net the smith wove, gods laughing like mortals, envy and delight braided together. Laughter loosens shoulders, and olive oil goes round again. Gifts are ordered with the same efficiency this city applies to shipbuilding. Alcinous tells each noble to bring a chest with heavy things in it, cloth, gold, cups that make a guest a better host back home. The one who insulted earlier comes close with a sword as straight apology, sheath and belt included, words quiet but serviceable. The queen calls for a chest of her own work and a cloak so that leaving does not feel like theft. Bathwater steams in a tub shaped to comfort. A stewardess rubs oil into muscles that have worked too long without thanks. A fresh tunic sits right across shoulders both strong and tired. Back to the hall, back to the lyre, back to the story that found him. Demodocus sings the horse at the gate, wood and guile, oarsman turned into silent cargo, a token left like a lie with perfect manners. He sings the feast interrupted by the sound a door makes when the bar is not where it was last night. He sings flame-tasting old cedar. He sings the ache inside victory. He sings a name without saying it. The guest folds in on himself, cloaked eyes, careful with breathing, as if the room were a battlefield and sound could draw a spear. Alcinous, who can read a man in shadow, stops the song with a hand and opens the space everyone has been circling. "Friend," he says, "no more sir or stranger. You weep for a story as if the story were looking back at you. We have fed you, tested you, promised you a road of water. The last courtesy is the one that makes gifts become more than weight. Tell us who you are, your land, your people, the name you'll want our ship to carve into spray when it runs. Tell us why the singer's song found your heart and squeezed it as if to make it speak. The room quiets the way a net grows still just before it lifts. Around the walls, lamp flames nod. Arete's eyes hold all the versions of welcome, administration, sympathy, calculation, and a human fondness for news. Demodocus lays his instrument down and folds his hands, content. The work of the evening has come to the right kind of edge. The guest sets his cup aside and takes in a breath that sounds more like preparation than relief. Far behind the city, where the river meets trees and the trees' roots drink wet earth, reeds rub together and make a sound like someone thinking. Out at sea, the ambushmen do not see anything to spring on. They pretend that had been their plan all along. In Ithaca, a lamp refuses to give up and flickers near a loom, where a patient conspiracy is being rewritten a strand at a time. In Pylos, an old man wakes before his house to remember for a moment a friend lost long ago, and smiles into the dark because memory itself is a form of victory. Above all of it, the gods watch a line of cause and effect lie down in the posture of a story. Athena stands where the hall's roof beams meet and weighs silence against revelation. Hermes, returning from distances, pauses at the door because he favours beginnings and endings both. Zeus does not speak. He listens the way weather listens to mountains. The guest lifts his head into the measured air of a people who make a science of hospitality. The first word in the sentence that binds his name to his deeds gathers behind his teeth. The rest waits like a coastline you can almost see if you climb one more ridge. The room holds its breath and I take mine. My name, I say, is Odysseus of Ithaca, where the slopes smell of time and the harbour knows the shape of my keel as if it were a friend. The lamps make a quiet crown of light along the wall. The singer folds his hands on the lyre and does not look away. I pour the story carefully, the way you pour strong wine, steady, measured, knowing it carries both heat and truth. We sailed from Troy full of smoke and hard lessons. Our first landfall was Ismarus, city of the Cicones, low houses in a row, fields combed straight to the sea. We took it fast, victory still had too much salt in it. My men thought the world owed them surplus joy. I urged restraint and a clean departure. The shore taught another lesson. The inland clans came down with long shadows and longer spears. Dawn found us fighting for the trophy of leaving alive. 6 benches empty in each ship when we pushed off, names traded for oarlocks. We counted the silence and learned to listen to advice that sounds like prudence, not glory. We bore northward, and Zeus allied a bag of weather. Wind piled the water until our masts wrote nonsense on the sky. When light finally remembered us, we found a soft coast where trees leaned over coves and a sweetness moved in the air like forgiveness. My best scouts returned with smiles loosened from reason, eyes fogged with a calm that looked like surrender dressed up as peace. They had tasted lotus. and the taste had turned tomorrow into a word that meant nothing. I dragged them to the ships myself, tied them to benches gentle as you tie a sail in a gale, tight for love, and ordered oars. Memory returned with distance the way sense returns after fever. We did not look back. Next came a bay rimmed with black rock and a cave mouth large enough to promise either shelter or mistake. On the ledge outside, drying cheeses in careful rounds. Inside, pens built stout for fat flocks, pails clean and stacked, a shepherd's order good enough to trust. My men wanted to take what we could and leave the owner a portion and a prayer. Curiosity is a great captain and a terrible god. I chose to wait, to weigh the host's nature with my own eyes. At dusk the owner returned, huge, deliberate, moving like weather, heaving a pine trunk as a walking stick. He drove the ewes in, lifted a slab of doorstone only he could lift, and when the fire lit his face we saw a being older than most maps allow, single eye ringed with scars, Poseidon's blood in him, solitude wearing skin. He asked who we were and why the world had delivered us to his hearth. I recited the speech that always saves Greeks from Greeks. We are guests sent by need, shipborne wanderers, and Zeus attends the stranger and the one who receives him. He smiled in a way that meant he had no use for other people's gods. He asked a second time in a different tone. We did not say where the rest of our ships lay. I said they had been broken elsewhere by a wind this island did not seem to feel. He grunted a truth the size of the cave. Your words are not shelter. He reached down and took two of my crew in his hands as if they were arguments, dashed them on the floor, and ate them while we watched, braidless, lawless, like hunger that never learned its manners. When the slab settled across the mouth of the cave, it settled across every easy idea I had ever had. I thought of killing him then, my sword tasting the back of my tongue. I also thought of the doorstone I could not move and the sheep that needed unlocking at dawn. Survival is the art of waiting until the shape of the problem changes. At first light he ate again, with appetite and indifference, and drove his flock out. We were left with time and a plan carving itself out of fear. In the corner stood a length of olive wood curing in the dark, green cut, nearly straight, thick as a man's thigh. We trimmed it, smoothed it with hands that shook only once, hardened the point in coals, and hid it under dung and straw. The one thing we still had was a gift from a distant shore, sweet wine in a skin, thick enough to bend a voice. He returned at dusk with the sea on his shoulders, tucked the flock inside and ate two more. I rose with the skin and a smile, yes, a smile, and held out the drink the way one holds out a solution you want accepted as if it were your host's idea. He took it, first gulp, then frown, then another taking the frown away. He asked my name and I said, "Nobody." He laughed, called me a friend and said he would eat me last. When he slept, wine and pride at war inside him, we slid the stake into the embers until it sang quiet and mean, then lifted it, four at the point and I bracing behind me, and drove it where the god's oversight had left a single eye. The cave filled with a sound that did not forgive. He reared and ripped the stake away, blood and unnatural water coursing down his face. The flock bawled, the rock shook, neighbours called from their caves, "What happens?" And he, bound by the name he'd granted me, shouted, "Nobody hurts me." They grumbled home, leaving him to discover that language is a poor rope when pain makes the knots. He sat at the door by touch, hands spread low, hoping to catch a rush to freedom. At dawn he pushed the doorstone aside, felt the sheep one by one as they filed out, and never noticed that we had tied ourselves beneath the largest rams, their felted bellies a darkness between our terror and daylight. We moved with the herd, the air tasted like the world again. On the beach, blue water making that sound that says hurry, I could have left a clean story in the cave. Pride takes small bargains and makes them large. I shouted my name. I could feel my men flinch at the waste of caution. He stood on the headland, blind and enormous, and threw mountains in pieces. One fell short, one lifted us, and then set us down by grace of timing. Both shook the moral into me that the sea has tried to teach every sailor who ever thought the horizon was a mirror. He lifted his hands and spoke up into wind. He didn't use my name, he used his father's, the ocean's keeper, and asked for a sentence to be carried out over long distance, make him come home late and empty after loss and sorrow. If that is too much, then let each part of the price be paid in full. And so the water wrote my itinerary without my consent, and I learned that a single word thrown at the wrong time can hire a god as your enemy. We put the island behind us and found a new kindness, a high-walled harbour in a floating castle of rock, and a man who knew wind like other men and no horseflesh. Aeolus welcomed us and kept a month of stories, feasts, and clean beds. When I asked for a way home, he gave it, a bulging skin tied with silver thong, full of every wind that would love to waste your aim. He set the one fair breeze we needed free, and cautioned me to guard the rest from idle hands. 10 days we sailed without swearing. Ithaca rose within smell. I watched the headlands stack like folded paper, and, because I am human, dozed. My crew, wonderful men, hungry men, men who had seen me refuse gold so often they assumed that this tight skin of treasure must be for me alone, untied the knot. The world went mad. Wind screamed out and kinked the sea into a coil of snakes. The prow spun. The island fell backward into its own distance. We ended where we had started, at a king's table, with my apology salt bitter in my mouth. Aeolus looked at me as if I were a map that had already been walked wrong. "The gods hate you," he said plainly. "I will not help you twice against the tide of that." We rowed. We found a small harbour where cliffs met so close their shadows touched at noon, and a narrow arm of water held quiet. A city rose inside the ring, smoke straight from their hearths in a windless curve. I sent scouts politely. A woman of a size you do not meet often led them into a hall, where the king reached out and plucked one off the floor for meat. Giants, the Laestrygonians, poured through streets with stakes that were really tree trunks and cracked ships like walnuts. Boulders rained, masts snapped. Crews screamed once, and then the water did what water always does, accepted. Only my ship, moored outside the trap, cut its cable fast enough to make release a verb. We left the harbour to its own echoes, because nothing you say to catastrophe improves its manners. After that, the sea softened its jaw, and we saw a tender shore where trees and birds made their own agreeable racket. We beached, we ate, we slept, because the body does not take counsel from fate. In the morning I divided the men, half to explore, half to keep hearth and ship. They found a stone house in a clearing and smoke that smelled of a kitchen like any other. Spit, herbs, sweetness. Wolves and lions lay docile at the door. The old gods love disguises, and wagged their tails like servants. A woman with bronze-coloured hair and hands trained to turn raw into marvellous greeted them with civility that had teeth hidden behind it. She offered food in bowls that glowed with glaze and scent. She stirred a pinch into the wine that loosened the will, and when they ate, she said a word that sealed their names on the wrong list. Men who have broken spears on walls and kept laughing have no defence against a cup that carries forgetfulness. They became animals in their bodies as quickly as greed becomes law in a tyrant, grunting where once they argued, herded into pens under lash of a wand. One of my men, Eurylochus, cautious to a fault that now looked like vision, ran back to the ship pale as driftwood. I took my sword and went alone, because alone is sometimes better medicine than a mob. In the path a figure rose lightly from scrub, a youth with a smile like a trick well meant, and a rod in his hand that could have measured the wind. "You're headed into a room where words are nets," he said. "Take this." In his palm lay an herb with a dark root and a flower white as good sleep. Its name was Moly, and it was resistance carved into living green. Eat it and you will feel the spell nudge and slide off. Draw your sword as if to strike when she bids you lie down, but make your strike into a pact. Demand the oath that keeps a guest safe in a house where much else has learned to be unsafe. He left as lightly as he had come. The air tasted briefly of messages safely delivered. I did what he said. The cup did not fog. The wand did not work. My sword lifted. Her eyes changed. Fear broke and then turned to something like respect. She swore the oath. We shared the bed that stops being a trap when both minds are doing the same arithmetic. And, more important than my private honour, she turned my companions back from their pens to their faces, washed them, fed them, and taught their hands to remember their names. We stayed. Days braided into months. Meals became conversations. Hearts that had been hammered thin by weather broadened. It is easy to forget the project of home when your feet stop hurting. One morning a year had passed, and a better voice inside me spoke at last. Enough, it said, making the word feel like victory. I asked for a release. She gave it with provision and a plan. You must visit the house that eats all goodbyes, she said without ornament. There is a blind man there who sees what you need. No road, only water. Dig a trench where the river of forgetfulness moves through the dark. Pour milk and honey, wine and water. Promise the dead you will remember them with blood. Keep your sword bare to regulate the cue. When the prophet drinks, he will speak. The face of my men changed as a council of rain clouds changes when a wind decides. We obeyed because refusal would have only turned into a different kind of obedience with worse timing. We sailed to the edge of maps, where the sun's chariot stables at night and the air smells iron and damp. We hauled the black sheep ashore, dug the trench, poured offerings in measured amounts, and spoke name by name to a listening we could not see. The dead came up like fog with faces. I held the sword out, not as threat, as traffic and boundary, and called the prophet. Tiresias came, staff feeling for the ground like memory looking for footing. He drank and spoke, and his words took shape like a coastline in morning. Poseidon's anger will not forget you. You can still come through with your skin on if you respect the island where the sun keeps his flocks. Do not touch what glitters with the god's name. If you fail this, you will fail your crew. You yourself, late, hurt on a borrowed ship, will still see your own house if you master rage the day it most wants you. After, you owe the sea a sacrifice away from the sea, an oar over your shoulder until strangers mistake it for a winnowing fan. Then plant it, promise the gods, and go home to peace. We spoke with others because the world never lets you take only what you came for. I held my mother in my arms and felt the cold truth that distance can make even love into a rumour. Companions fallen at Troy stepped forward and told me the shape of their endings so I could carry their names forward with accuracy. Agamemnon's story fell like an axe. Ajax turned away the way pride often does. Achilles, who used to outrun even his own shadow, said one clear sentence that still sounds in me. Better to be breathing in any house than a ruler among shades. We spared more blood than the trench needed because you do not leave the dead empty-handed. Then we turned the sterns back toward the air that made the lungs less honest and more comfortable. Circe received us again, fed us, bathed us, reminded me that kindness and control are cousins that must be kept from sharing a wallet, and laid out a chart for the living leg of the passage. The sirens, whose voices tell you secrets that turn you to stone while you listen. A strait where a rock with 6 mouths eats certainty. A whirlpool that drinks schedules, and beyond them, the meadow of the sun's beasts shining with a god's accounting. This far, and the room in Sharia is quiet enough to hear oil lamps breathe. I lift the cup, set it down full, and keep going, because stopping here would be a comfortable lie. I put wax in my crew's ears and had them tie me to the mast, I say, because I wanted to hear beauty safely, a greedy bargain that the sea allowed me once. I counted to 6 and steered away from names that belonged to rock and gouge. I spit foam with fear and time into Charybdis's mouth, and I warned my men about a pasture too perfect. Hear the words slow, because the right account is a wound reopened cleanly. Hunger argued with law. The sea slept a windless sleep. The meat glittered like surrender. They ate. The sun spoke a complaint that moved Zeus himself, and when we put out the next day, the sky came apart with a directness nobody survives except by the slimmest accident. 1 plank and a patience learned at 100 oarlocks kept me above the arithmetic. I washed back into the strait, clung to a fig tree while the world drank itself calm, let the trunk bite my arms until tide and mercy matched, and then the sea found me and rolled me to a shore where time is a mirror. You know the rest. You gave me back the dignity of audience. I let the last words sit, not for effect, but because I need to trust the room to hold it. Alcinous leans forward, captain's shoulders, craftsman's eyes, and says what an honest man says when a story shows him where he belongs in it. We will do what we promised. Ship, crew, oars, gifts. We are good at this old art, and we do not drop guests halfway. Sleep tonight knowing that tomorrow the sea will behave as if it still remembers laws written before gods were born. Around the edges of the bright hall, the quiet industry of trust begins. Porters move chests built for keeping promises. Carpenters check pegs on a deck that has never failed a voyage. A pilot leans over a chart he knows by heart anyway, and traces with 2 fingers where the currents assist conviction. Arete folds garments she wove herself and lays them where a man who cares about the weight of his own name will find them. Demodocus lays his hand flat on the lyre's wood and thanks it wordlessly for letting truth choose melody. In the outer dark, a breeze slides down the hill as if it had been hired. It smells of figs, of clean rope, of a harbour's patient grammar, and far away, at a narrow headland where rocks cup a passage like a palm, men in shadow finally accept that their ambush has the blessing of neither tide nor timing. Boats swing at anchor, muttering small complaints. They rehearse once more the innocently raised eyebrows with which they will meet the question, "Where were you?" and discover that the shape their faces settle into looks a lot like fear. In Ithaca, a lamp fed on last oil is pinched out with fingers practiced at denying panic its feast. A loom waits. A dog sleeps with its head on boards that smell of missing feet and doesn't wake because even loyalty must rest. Above all, the sky adjusts the balance it had set at dawn. Athena crosses the beam and presses lightly on the pan that holds a passage home. Poseidon, busy with his own ledger, doesn't look up tonight, or if he does, he pretends not to recognise the name written in small, clean script on the page. The sea, which understands schedules better than kings, lifts and lowers itself a measured fraction and considers for once being kind for 2 days straight. Night folds down over Scheria the way a sail is taken in, clean, practised, meant. Gifts lie stacked by the threshold, chests that clink with hammered kindness, cloth soft as a promise, bowls that will make wine taste like good weather. Alcinous keeps his word the way a pilot keeps a course. The best hull is hauled to water, keel tarred, pegs checked with thumbs that know the difference between tight and safe. Rowers choose places by habit rather than rank. A helmsman with wrists like braided rope stands where the tiller will become a thought travelling through oak. The guest, washed, oiled, full in the right ways, let sleep take him like an oath fulfilled. They carry him aboard and set him on purple rugs near the stern. The sea accepts the weight with a small nod of foam. Oars lift, dip, lift again. A wind slides into the sail as if it had been told a secret and agreed to keep it. Song rises quietly, the kind that keeps timing true and hands from blistering, a work hymn that has learned not to brag. The island's lights lean away, water becomes road. At dawn, cliffs appear as if the earth were rolling up its sleeve. Ithaca's forearm, muscled with terraces and old paths. The crew knows the inlets by smell. Wild thyme and goat, cold rock, the faint iron note of a spring falling through fern. They ease the hull into a cove 2 harbours over from the town so waking won't turn into ceremony. Sleep, obliging, does not loosen its hold. They lift the man and lay him on the sand under an olive with 2 trunks braided like a long marriage. Chests are stacked beside him without a clink. The helmsman plants an oar in the shore and says something into the air about distances having been properly paid. Then they push off, lean into the oars with the relish of a job done to specification, and turn for home. Far out, a god counts. Poseidon rises from water as if it were only a cloak, not a country. He's been feasted elsewhere and wears the indifference of those who have been admired too long, but he has not forgotten the puncture in his household, an eye taken, a name shouted in the wrong direction over a wide plain of salt. He looks towards Scheria with the measured malice of a professional. Zeus answers from dry sky with a nod toward moderation, a warning, not a ruin. That is all. The homebound ship curves toward its harbour, bowsprit high like pride, and turns to stone within sight of the quay, grace note to a lesson. The wake hardens into a ridge of water that never quite falls. On shore a wall rises where none was, knuckling the city in. The Phaeacians stand quiet, understanding that some favours cost, that excellence attracts accountings, and that they will still keep doing what they do because refusing the sea is not a life. Under the olive, a sleeper breathes the air of his own roads for the first time in too many calendars. The island recognises the shape of him and calls a friend. Athena steps down with a shepherd's crook in hand and a grin that reads like conspiracy. She lays the easy fog of disguise on everything within arm's length. The harbour looks different, stones put on new faces, landmarks tilt by a few degrees, because surprise is a kind of safety. When he wakes, she is already leaning on her staff, counting him with a glance that has missed nothing since he last set foot here. "Name this place," she says, bright as cold water. He looks and sees unfamiliarity where home should be and answers with caution, another island, some far shore, testing the lie because lies are tools here. She laughs the way a bowstring laughs when it looses a sure shot and lets the fog thin. "Ithaca, she says, saying the name as if it were a word she invented. "Yours, and you are as incurable as I remember." She points with the crook. The cave of the nymphs behind the olive, the goat paths that climb like logic, the town where ceremony and insult have been living together too long. Plans assemble themselves under her hand the way a ship takes shape under a good foreman. "Gifts first," she says. "Hide them where earth remembers favours." Together they roll the chests into the cave's cool, where stone keeps inventory better than scribes. Now a face the house jackals will not bother to understand. She lays fingers on his cheekbones and pulls a decade across them. The skin roughens, colour drains, shoulders stoop, eyes dimmer but narrower. The kind of man who has learned to make himself small to survive other people's appetites. A staff replaces a sword. Rags replace the tunic that sat right across his back. Odysseus looks down and sees the truth. Nothing about purpose has changed. "Go to the swineherd," she says. "Eumaeus. He knows how to keep a fire and a secret. I'll bring your son home. He's on his way whether he knows it or not. And there are nets in the passage meant for him. We'll cut through them the way dry oak splits, cleanly. Up in the hills, smoke the colour of bread crust lifts from a hut built to defy weather and indifference. Fenced pens hold animals whose backs are the island's savings account. A pair of big dogs lifts their heads and decides what to do with the figure on the path. The man whose name the house is tied to steps out, whip in hand, kindness in his jaw, and calls the dogs off before judgment gets ahead of hospitality. He looks the stranger over like a craftsperson looks at a new tool, respectful, curious, competent, and does what good men do, brings him inside and makes him warm. Eumaeus moves with a priest's practicality. He sets a chair near the fire, lifts a pot from the coals with a pagan blessing none of the gods would object to, salts meat, stirs, tastes, spoons. He slices the best portion for the stranger himself. He eats the humbler cut without the humility reading as performance. Words come slowly at first, oiled by wine in rough cups. They have turned the house into a fair, he says of the suitors. They eat and call it royal duty. They promise and call it governance. It is theft with clean hands. He does not pretend bravery he cannot prove. If Odysseus walked in through that door with a few fellows like-minded, I would stand. As it is, I keep the pigs fat, the fences mended, and the curses under my breath. The stranger's answers are made of weather and roads. He offers a fabricated origin that fits neatly into a palm. Born far off, blown about, once knew a man named Odysseus and can swear he lives. And then he watches what belief does to Eumaeus's face. The swineherd refuses hope the way a sober man refuses a second cup offered by a flatterer. Strangers bring this news because it is a coin that spends well, he says, not bitter, just unwilling to be used. If it is true, the gods will reveal it. If it is false, the gods will forgive you. Then he piles wool cloaks over a sleeping platform of rawhide and cedar boughs, and makes a bed for his guest, keeping a respectful distance that reads like affection. Night on the ridge tastes of animal breath and ash. Storms speed past without stopping. Eumaeus sleeps lightly, leaning against the door, shabby cloak over his shoulders, shoes near his hand. The stranger watches the fire a while, the way men who have outlived too many nights watch it, and then sleeps in the posture of someone who remembers how. Outside, in the dark seam between stone and sky, a goddess makes distances fold. Sparta wakes in its bright halls to find a voice already at the threshold that belongs neither to friend nor enemy, but to necessity. Athena shakes Telemachus from his couch the way a hand shakes dew from laurel, firm, gentle, dropping what's needed. Home, she says, now. Your mother counts hours in a house where hours misbehave. Men lie in wait in a narrow arm of sea called Astris. Don't give them the theatre they want. Put your best hand at the helm, hold the main offshore after sunfall, and run for the cove where the ground itself keeps secrets. There is a swineherd's hut that knows the shape of your family's luck. The youth bows to gratitude, informs his host with the courtesy that keeps alliances tidy, and moves. Menelaus adds weight to the departure. A bowl, good cloth, a word about danger that comes out like weather forecast rather than alarm. Helen, who sees patterns like weavers see mistakes, drapes a robe over the traveller that will look right in any room he enters. Horses stamp, wheels bite dust. Pylos receives him with a nod and sends him on with a ship that understands discretion. On the way, fate brings a passenger with ink still wet on his sentence. Theoclymenus, eyes too full of symbols, begs a berth and offers augury instead of coin. Telemachus weighs cost and risk and says yes with the calm that has surprised him lately. Out at sea, a hawk scythes the air with a dove in its talons, and lets the feathers fall into the wake in a zigzag that looks like handwriting. The seer smiles, reading aloud what the sea has written. The house you're headed for will stand. Those who try to write lies inside it will find their ink turns to sand. Back under the olives weather, the day breaks into chores in Eumaeus's yard. Feed, count, mend, plan. The stranger offers help, is waved off, insists. Work finds his hands the way truth finds its word when you stop forcing it. Stories trade places for a while. The swineherd breaks his own past into squares and passes them like bread. born a prince in a far corner of the world, stolen by sailors whose hands knew ropes and theft equally well, sold into this island's economy like a tool. He found in Laertes a kind master and in Odysseus a kind of law. Pay on time, speak straight, do not forget names. He loved me and I loved him, is the shape of the tale, though he does not say it that way. He says it like inventory, inventory, fair measures, few lies, much work, enough joy. He does not break when he says the name, he cleans a knife and sets it down just so. Midday split into light and shadow finds feet on the path. A shape at the gate pauses to let the dogs know him, and then laughs when they thrust muzzles into his hands without question. Telemachus steps into the yard with sea on his shoulders and a new steadiness in his eyes. Eumaeus runs forward and kisses his head in his hands and weeps briefly the way a fence weeps under wind and then stops. Bread, meat, water. Questions. The stranger in rags looks with interest hidden behind humility. Telemachus shows courtesy to a nobody because his mother taught him manners as the first armour, and because something in the posture of this beggar does not read as begging. News spills. Ambushes set and foiled by weather that refuse to be complicit. A seer aboard, a harbour chosen for secrecy, a resolve that has stopped asking permission from fear. Eumaeus is sent to the city to tell the queen quietly that her son is back so breath can be taken properly. Telemachus stays, exchanges the slightest glance with the stranger that takes the measure of two men as if weighing in Libra's beam. Then the hut is empty, but for them fire and the small noises that mean a house is alive. Athena steps in as if the door were only a metaphor. Eumaeus's absence is her invitation. The air shifts. She lifts her hand and pulls the false age back off the face she loves to sharpen. Skin tightens, shoulders straighten, eyes light. The rags fall like a lie that has served and can be retired. The son sees a father. The father sees the boy he has been catching up to in dreams. The room holds 2 breaths too long. Then the sound that follows is not theatrical. It is a catch in the throat made of 10 years paced into a single step. Arms, tears, no speeches at first because speeches belong to other rooms. When words return, they are work words, shaped to fit hands. We count allies, Odysseus says. Athena, you, me, Eumaeus, the cowherd likely. Your mother's cleverness. Perhaps a few gods who prefer proportion to theft. We count enemies. The list is long and soft around the edges, because wine makes men slippery. We count tools, a mind that knows rooms, a bow that only one back can bend. Timing, silence. Telemachus tries the logic on like a cloak. It fits. He warns the impulse that wants to rush the hall. The impulse sits down and learns to wait. They sketch the plan on the tabletop with crumbs. Telemachus will go back to the house and be casual the way a cat is casual before it leaps. He will suffer insults on purpose and not spend his wrath on small change. He will gather weapons from racks that have been neglected and move them, under pretext, into a room with a lock only he and one other will know. He will tell his mother nothing except the truth that keeps her steady. Odysseus will follow later, leaning on his staff. White hair like a lure, and will beg at the tables and accept blows without blinking, because information harvested that way is clean and cannot be bought. The bow will wait behind its day, an answer disguised as celebration. Far off in the town, suitors practice speeches in the polished wood of their mouths, and find that some words refuse to stand properly. Theoclymenus walks through the gate with Telemachus's crew and sits on a threshold, eyes far away, and sees hawks at noon doing things they should not do, and names it to those who will not listen. Penelope feels air changing outside her window, and does not let herself believe until a loyal man speaks low. She takes light in with a breath deeper than the body alone would have needed. Evening slides down the hill as if it had been ordered by a general who understands how to keep a schedule. Eumaeus returns from town with news and curses that are practical rather than decorative. The dogs settle. The fire performs its oldest trick, turning wood into safety. Father and son sleep on beds made of hides and purpose, one ear each open the way sailors keep one ear open, even ashore. In the dark, Athena checks locks that are not locks, loyalties, courage, the seam where plan meets chance. The sea, momentarily off stage, breathes. The mountain holds its shadow steady over the cove where a certain ship slid a certain sleeping man onto sand at morning. Tomorrow is already walking down the path, smiling with too many teeth. The answer is ready at the door. Morning slides down the ridge to the swineherd's yard like warm water over stone. Eumaeus is already moving, checking lashings, counting snouts with a murmured prayer that sounds like inventory, not theatre. Telemachus tightens his sandals and looks toward town with the calm of someone who has decided what to spend his anger on. The beggar at the hearth stands and becomes taller inside the rags without changing his height. Plans fit into pockets. Names become tools. "Go first," Odysseus says to the swineherd. "Let me come behind alone so I can read the streets without you being read." Eumaeus nods and takes the lower path with a shepherd's pace. Unhurried, efficient, impossible to surprise. Odysseus waits a beat to let dust settle, then leans on his staff and starts for the city that used to be his, practicing the posture that makes cruelty reveal itself. At a stony bend, a figure comes up shouldering a bundle of fine goat meat as if he were carrying a compliment meant for himself. Melanthius, goat-herd by trade, parasite by temperament, looks over the stranger the way a bad buyer looks over a stolen thing. Words fall out of him oily and cheap. Filth from nowhere, still breathing by accident. He punctuates the judgment with a kick that glances off bone. The staff steadies. The eyes that will one day judge him do not flicker. Melanthius laughs and strides on toward a hall where he mistakes access for importance. The dogs down in Eumaeus's yard, had they been here, would have known better. The palace sits where it always sat, but the air around it has learned an uglier grammar. By the threshold lies a shape that has been waiting longer than anyone in that hall. Argos, all ribs and patience, eyes clouded but accurate in the one task that still matters. The old hound lifts his head and recognition floods what's left of him like warm milk. He tries to stand and can't. He lets the tail do the telling. The beggar looks away for the length of one breath because some honours are too sharp to take square. A tear makes a small clean mark in the dust at his foot. Inside, the suitors shout for liver and dice. Outside, the hound lets go the job he started as a pup and dies satisfied. He steps across the threshold into heat and noise and the easy rudeness of men who believe the house is theirs because the house suffers them. Telemachus sees him and lifts a cup a fraction higher than courtesy requires. Eumaeus places a stool and a portion as if he were serving a king with a cold. The beggar makes his circuits, bowl extended, taking measure by the shape of refusals. Most give something to pay for feeling good later. Some give nothing and advertise it. Antinous, soft as butter and twice as proud, tilts his chair back and narrates contempt as if it were a talent. When the beggar asks a piece of bread from the man with the best plate, the answer is an insult rehearsed and improved upon in front of laughing heads. The beggar returns one sentence that lands with more weight than its length. "You look like a lord who learned manners from his cup." That is enough. Antinous lifts a footstool and throws. Wood strikes bone with a sound that quiets the nearest conversations. The beggar rocks, steadies, does not fall. Telemachus feels his fingers grip the chair spear and releases it by will alone. Around the boards, a few men murmur that hitting a supplicant is not luck-making behaviour. Antinous smiles and calls pity weakness. Men who will die in the morning sometimes rehearse their last lines without knowing. Eumaeus returns to the yard at dusk with news packed tight in his mouth. The beggar stays. Servants clear trenches and set fresh water. Lamps are coaxed to brighter. A singer strings his instrument and looks toward a corner where he won't be required to flatter. Penelope hears from a housemaid with actual eyes that a stranger bore the blow and did not spill his dignity. She sends word she wishes to speak. The beggar answers via a respectful mouth that night is kinder to truth than day. Let the house grow sleepy and the hall's appetite dull, and then he will answer anything she asks as cleanly as he can. Night gathers its skirts and gives the women of the household a little cover for the errands they prefer not to own. Some, faithful to their wages and to the quiet law of decency, bank fires, mix grain, fold cloth without gossip. Others slide towards the sound of suitors with perfume on their wrists and borrowed jewellery bright as betrayal. Odysseus watches and writes the ledger down to the names because mercy needs accuracy, and judgment, when it comes, must not borrow from rumour. Between the first and second watch, a man with no tolerance for competition arrives. Iris, beggar by brand, distributor of threats no one respects in daylight. He sees a rival in the scraps business and blusters, puffing at the rafters. The suitors clap like boys at a yard brawl, throw down sausages as purses, and demand entertainment. The beggar weighs the disgust of fighting on cue against the usefulness of humiliating a mascot in front of an audience that thinks itself safe. He asks for an oath that no one will jump in or stab in the back. It's granted because a show's better without knife until it isn't. He ties his rags tighter at the waist. Athena puts weight back into his shoulders for the length of a single lesson. The belly that looked like famine becomes clean muscle under cloth. Iris sees what's now in front of him and wants out. But laughter is a noose. 2 punches. One answers and ends the argument. Iris kisses dust and later learns the courage of silence. The mood lifts into a dangerous amusement. Penelope walks down from her rooms with a lamp in each hand and a mind like winter sun. Cool, precise, revealing. The room hushes without being told because everyone, even fools, knows the difference between authority and costume. She speaks to the suitors as if they still had respect left to spend. "You've eaten," she says, "and drunk, and made my household work harder than any harvest ever did. If you will not leave, then buy your place in this story. In my husband's absence, Bringift's vanity is quicker than virtue. Jewellery arrives on the air like rain. Necklaces with gold beads caught in the pattern, pins with amber heads against ivory, cloaks dyed deep and edged with embroidery meant to flatter eyes that see too much. Odysseus watches and sees that she has now stolen from them the one thing they thought they were taking from her, control of the narrative. Thieves pay tribute without noticing. Later, in a smaller circle of light, the queen sits with the beggar and asks for biography to test it against her own long memory. He tells a story built for this room, Crete, hospitality given to a guest named Odysseus once, the cut of the cloak, the bronze of the pin, the precise number of companions, the way his voice fell when he said Ithaca, in the past tense and didn't like it. She weeps in a way that doesn't need audience. He feels the wall around truth and keeps to it, then promises one thing he can promise without magic. He is near. He is on this island already, or in the next dawn's wind. She hears comfort and stores it without spending it. "If that is true," she says, "you'll have thanks. If not, you still have mine tonight." She calls for water and the washing that hospitality owes even the least of guests. Eurycleia comes with the basin, old, exact, made of rituals and experience. She bends to the task without looking closely at first. Her hands have washed 1,000 ankles of strangers and princes and men in between. When she fingers the scar under the grime, a long, healed crescent made by a boar's tooth long ago on a hunt with a man who was nothing but promise, her mouth opens on a name, and a cry not meant for other ears. He drops his heel to her wrist gently and catches her with a glance that saves lives. Silence. For a few more hours, let morning have the announcement. Let the hall write its own epilogue before we read it aloud. Tears fall into the water and make a pattern no oracle ever bothered to interpret. Loyalty agrees to keep the most expensive secret a servant can keep. Across the room, Theoclemenus sits in the chair nearest the exit, as men like him always do, and stares past the cups to see what's stamped on the air. He sees blood drip from walls that are not bleeding. He sees ghosts at the doorpost nodding as if taking seats. He sees the sun go out while lamps still burn with unnatural stamina. He says what he sees with the bewildered calm of someone merely delivering the weather. Darkness thickens, hands float without Boisides. Laughter sounds like something that used to be alive. The suitors clap and call him drunk. It is a common way to dismiss the future. Midnight. Telemachus touches his father's sleeve and makes the first move the plan requires. Together, in a house full of eyes that do not suspect purpose behind rags, they lift spears from pegs and unstring bows from brackets with the slow reverence men usually reserve for sacred things. They carry armfuls grainwood and set them in a storeroom where the air is cool and the floor remembers everything placed upon it. If anyone asks, Telemachus says later in the hall, with credibility he didn't have last month, smoke has eaten the leather and made the strings useless. It is safer in storage, men nod, because laziness loves plausible maintenance. Doors are barred in the right places, left easy in others. The best of the house servants are told in tiny useful sentences what to do tomorrow if something unconventional happens. The worst of them keep giggling with men who will name this night the last time anything was easy. Athena stands where a pillar meets the ceiling and smiles like a locksmith. Before sleep, Odysseus walks out into the courtyard where stars are cold and generous. He lifts his hands the way a man does who has earned the right to ask and not be embarrassed. If this will hold, he says, not bargaining, not flattering, just asking for confirmation. Give me a sign I recognize. Thunder answers out of a sky without storms, a single measured note that feels like a verdict. Inside, at a handmill in a side room, a worker who hates the suitor's waste and says nothing by day coughs and speaks to the stones in the dark. Let this be the last night. The two sounds, thunder and the slow curse, cross and knot themselves into a message no one hears but the right mind. Dawn sidles into the court on bare feet. The suitors come in yawning under garlands they didn't earn and laughing to cover bad sleep. Penelope stands near a pillar with a stillness that draws eyes and then lowers them. She has decided on a test and dresses it in ritual, so no one will see it as the knife it is. You want an ending, she says without raising her voice. Here is mine. Bring me the bow that he left, a gift from a guest he once outthrew, and the axes with clean rings set in a straight line. Whoever strings that bow and sends an arrow through 12 holes can talk to me about tomorrow. Until then, you are spectators, well-fed and irrelevant. Servants go to fetch what an entire decade has been waiting for. The great bow wrapped in cloth that smells of cedar, the iron set in a row like numbers written in metal. The beggar sits in shadow and breathes once for all the rooms that brought him to this one. Telemachus grins without showing teeth. Eumaeus prays under his breath with one hand on the beam that holds the roof up. Outside, a breeze moves the olive leaves into speech no human language can print. Above, the gods lean in, not to intervene, but to watch craft match justice in the oldest race a household can run. And the hall, suddenly interested in skill again, falls quiet around a long table that has not hosted anything worth remembering in years. The bow waits like a truth with a handle. The day shifts its weight from one foot to the other, ready to be longer if necessary. Somewhere in the dust by the threshold there is the print of a dog's last contentment. Somewhere else, in the storeroom coolness, bronze catches its own reflection and knows exactly what hour it is. Morning stands in the doorway like a witness. The bough lies on a table long enough to remember good years, wrapped in cloth that smells of cedar and truth. Axes are set in a straight line, sockets forward, iron rings catching light. The hall crowds closer, appetite changing its clothes and calling itself competition. Telemachus, half smile and full control, tries the string first to mock the distance between his age and the story they think they own. He almost finds it. 3 pulls, a 4th that nearly lands, then laughs at himself in the right tone and steps aside. One after another, the great talkers of Ithaca come forward with wrists that have never met a plough. Leiades, Amphinomus, Eurymachus. Their claims are warmer than their hands. The bow answers each with the same calm refusal. It is not a riddle, it is a measurement. Antinous plays host to his own humiliation as if he were staging a festival. Let it be softened by fire, he says. Grease it, warm it, give us a day. He is buying time because time feels like an ally to people who don't know what hour it is. The hall agrees because none of them want this ending yet. They call for the fat that slicks anything that resists. They send the bow to the fire as if heat could trick what is built from purpose. In the corner, the beggar signals with a glance and a sentence someone else would have missed. Eumaeus and the coward Philetius come near with the wary devotion of men who have not been permitted hope for a decade and do not intend to waste it in one reckless minute. Outside, under the portico's shadow, Odysseus shows them the scar, old moon of puckered skin on his shin, from a boar that taught him early what exuberance can cost. He names them brothers without pretty language and swears the plan in the old way, hand to throat, eyes held steady. Eumaeus's jaw goes hard. Philoetius lifts a hand to his mouth as if to keep faith from escaping. They are told their part. Lock the courtyard gate, bolt the hall doors, put the bow into the beggar's hands and pretend it is called a joke. Back inside, Penelope stands under a pillar with a stillness that makes space around it. She announces the test formally, voice clear, and then returns to her place as if this were any other household matter. She does not look at the beggar. She looks at the bow. The moment arrives packaged as insolence. Let the old man try, Odysseus says softly, as if asking for a crust, not a verdict. Laughter equals consent more often than men admit. Antinous hisses about impropriety and reputation. Penelope herself smiles thinly and says the custom of guest right requires more generosity than that. Telemachus calls for silence with a tone that rearranges air. The bow comes to the stranger like water to the shape you pour it into. Eumaeus carries it, eyes wet. One of the jeerers mocks the shepherd for crying. The shepherd sets the wood down and walks away so nobody sees what it costs to pretend. The beggar weighs the bow the way you weigh a familiar tool after a long winter, testing the grain with his palms, rolling it to feel if time has nicked anything that matters. He lifts it, turns it, checks both arms, and then in one smooth motion sets it upright, plants the bottom against his foot, and draws. The string kisses wood. No strain, no flourish. A sound like a swallow's wing beats once through the room. Zeus answers with a concise thunder outside of any cloud. Heads turn, some necks stiffen. It is not a storm, it is a signature. He reaches for an arrow casually from the quiver that the boy set by him as if arranging furniture. He does not sight long. He knows the yardage the way you know your own name. He sends the shaft down the grey hallway of air. It passes the 12 rings, as if they had been laid out to confirm a measurement he took long ago. The final clang is not loud, it is exact. The hall exhales, then inhales the wrong decision. Applause. Antinous lifts a tall cup. Wine runs like arrogance. The beggar swivels and lets the next arrow fly before anyone believes he would. It strikes where a throat learns regret. The sound that follows is not brawl sound, it is a messy silence breaking. Antinous falls with the spill still red on his lips. He never knew a precise minute had been hunting him. The cup rings on stone and learns humility. Odysseus steps forward, skin dropping the last of the rags the way fog drops from a ridge when sun insists. "You thought this house had no owner," he says, voice flat. "You thought oath and salt were ornaments. You ate, you lied, you threatened what you could not deserve. There will be no ransom." He names them without shouting, each to his face, turning the roll call into a verdict. Panic tries to bargain. Eurymachus raises his hands and volunteers someone else's guilt. "Antinous was the engine. We only rode." He offers restitution, gold, oxen, more gold, as if arithmetic could erase contempt. Odysseus nods once as if he recognizes the math and then refuses it with a sentence that turns the offer to ash. "Even if you had everything, and you will soon have nothing, there is not enough to buy backwards." Eurymachus screams for the crowd to gather itself, to seize the door, to use tables as shields. He lunges. An arrow meets him in the chest before bravery becomes a plan. Amphinomus calculates fast and charges. Telemachus meets him with a spear that lands clean and then goes to fetch more weapons because the storeroom is where tomorrow lives. He runs, opens the door, arms himself and 2 loyal men, Eumaeus and Philoetius, then remembers the door behind him. Too late for perfection. Melanthius, the goat-herd who kicks for sport, finds his way in the crack of that mistake, hands greedy for blades to carry out to friends who are starting to understand the debt they owe. He scurries, he arms, he grins wrong. Athena comes into the room as mentor and stands beside the pillar, with a small smile like steel. She does not swing a spear, she lends accuracy and speed to the ones who can use it. The first flight of arrows makes a new grammar in the hall. Sentence, answer, lesson. A few suitors rush, expecting closeness to save them. Closeness only clarifies aim. A stool becomes a shield becomes a trap. The floor goes from banquet to reckoning stage in 5 breaths. Eumaeus and Philoetius catch Melanthius on his second errand, with a head full of plans and arms full of steel. They spare no courtesy. They drag him to a side room, pull him up the pillar with the ropes, and leave him inverted like a warning sign that can read itself. Later he will learn the cost of using a house like an arsenal when it has revoked his membership. A handsome opportunist named Agelaus attempts command. His voice holds for 1 sentence, then collapses under the weight of a shaft between ribs. Leiades, the mild-tongued priest of ease who blessed their lawlessness and called it ritual, tries to clasp knees in a late apprenticeship to humility. He is told no by someone who has counted the years of wasted counsel and finds none of it redeemable. Only the singer and the herald, the ones forced to adorn theft with melody and proclamation, are spared. They are dragged by Eurycleia out from under tables where survival had made them small. They receive the mercy their roles deserve. It was their job to attend, not to applaud. Mercy is control. Control returns to the room in usable pieces. Silence falls finally, a palpable thing like fog settling on pond water. The smell is metal and wine and old wood startled into honesty. Odysseus stands in the middle of it breathing evenly. He orders the doors open to the inner yard. He tells the disloyal women to bring light and water, to wash the room they help profane, to drag bodies where dogs and birds will answer the last unkept vows. They work under his eyes, their faces carrying a weather front each. When the floor gleams again, he instructs Telemachus to choose a clean rope that does not break quickly, because justice that lingers is the opposite of justice. The traitors are taken out where air moves and paid in 1 swift sum. It is ugly work done without relish or delay. Melanthius is untied to receive what his hands purchased, ears, nose, extremities. Then the dark receives him. This house has been reset to 0. Now the queen must be told. Euryclea runs with the speed of news she doesn't have to hate, and blurts the name as if it were water after fever. Penelope sits with an expression that no one in this story has yet successfully fooled. "My lady, he is here. The stranger was him. The bow sang. The room is clean." Penelope says what only a mind like hers would say. "Bring me proof." Proof enters in the form of a man whose face is a map written over by 10 winters and a scar, and a voice that never learned to flatter. She regards him as if measuring cloth. He smiles without asking for belief. She orders a bed to be made outside their chamber. He turns like a storm that found a mountain that won't move. "Who moved the bed?" he says, jealousy and carpentry braided tight. "I built that around a living olive. I carved the post from the rooted trunk. No one could shift it unless a god or a fool cut through the heart of the house." The sentence unlocks the room. Recognition runs through her like rain through thirsty earth. She crosses and breaks. There is no performance. Arms that have learned to hold grief let go. They sway as if riding out a swell together, both knowing exactly how close water can come without taking you when you steer right. Words come later, short first, then longer. Where he wandered, how she waited. The techniques of survival both used because love without technique is just ache. The bed remembers them. The door remembers how to be shut against weather and noise. Before dawn they speak duty in clear lines. "Not all of Ithaca will take this as relief," he says. "Blood asked for blood by habit. I will see my father and give the land a story to answer before rumour writes a worse one. You keep festival going so the city hears wine songs and not war songs while we step outside." She nods, less wife than co-pilot. The house wakes to the sounds of cleaning and celebration, precisely what bureaucracy expects after a wedding feast. Rumour, useful for once, goes to market and buys peace for an hour. He and the boy and 2 loyal hands walk out under the olive's half-light into the fields, where the island keeps its oldest promises. The farm lies working in its sleep. Vines hung with the memory of summer. Rows of trees with their trunks whitewashed against pests. The little ditch that keeps too much rain from unmaking the slope. Laertes is there in rough clothes, hands burned to leather, weeding like a hired man in his own name. Odysseus watches his father and decides how to speak to spare him both shock and joy's violence. He tests him with talk of buying. Laertes answers like a steward who both protects and suspects. Then the son holds up a list nobody else could know. Each tree planted, each graft taken. The day the old man's spade bit this ground in that spot, and he promised the boy's hands would harvest here. Recognition tears the years open. Laertes throws ash on his head out of habit, and then stops pretending he's only gardener. Arms. Curses that are prayers. Gratitude flung at the sky with names in it. Zeus for law, Athena for timing, Earth for holding steadies. But word moves faster than any plan. In town, fathers and brothers gather in a tight, angry braid under a man named Eupeithes, who delights in legal outrage. They lift spears and complaints and march out to find the meadow where they think justice waits to be reclaimed. Athena sees them from a sycamore and glances up at Olympus. Zeus answers with the one thing that stills mobs better than reasons. A clean thunderbolt that bites ground with no one under it. It shouts, "Enough!" On the field, both lines shuffle toward a last disaster. Odysseus and Laertes and Telemachus stand like 3 words of one sentence. Athena drops Mentor's mask and shines, and even angry men remember their knees. Eupeithes hurls one more insult, habit is stubborn, and receives a point under the chin that shortens his arguments forever. The rest falter, see where this leads, and drop hardware because they're not suicidal, only used to getting away with things. Athena speaks law into the air. Let there be forgetting, let the oaths reset, let rulers rule, and people live. It is not amnesty, it is triage. Zeus sends a second soundless agreement, and the island's temperature drops back into livable. Odysseus does not smile. He bows, a nod made of bone and humility. Peace is not a feeling. It is work to be performed daily. He accepts the yoke gladly. The day leans toward its right posture. In the town, laughter returns carefully to venues designed for it. In the palace, smoke climbs in honest columns, and the singer tunes a song that is not flattery, more like maintenance. Eurycleia counts linens without crying. Eumaeus and Philoetius trade jokes only men who have stood in doorways together can afford. Telemachus walks his hall as if it belonged to memory as much as to him. Penelope moves through rooms like weather that knows which fields need rain and which will drown. Laertes scrubs his hands and sits for once, laying tools where a younger hand will find them. Night, the kindly version, arrives on schedule. Hearth flames do what they are supposed to, make faces visible and intentions honest. Outside, the olive that anchors the bed sways once and steadies. Inside, the bed holds two people who prove that patience is a weapon when used correctly. On the threshold lies a faint print where a loyal hound last kept watch. A breeze moves dust and softens even that. Above everything, the constellations take attendance over a house that has learned its own grammar again. No trumpet, no decree carved in stone, just the oldest law kept at last. Welcome what is rightfully yours. Escort out what is not. Forgive what can be forgiven after judgment is satisfied. Then sleep like the sea on a windless night, ready to move, content to rest.